Hello, I'm Harry Glorikian, and this is The Harry Glorikian Show, where we explore how technology is changing everything we know about healthcare. The first person ever born as the product of in vitro fertilization was Louise Joy Brown. That was back in 1978, when the procedure was still highly experimental. Louise was greeted around the world as a miracle baby. But today, Louise Brown is 44 years old, and every year more than 500,000 babies are born through IVF. But here's the thing. While IVF is far more routine and more available to couples with fertility problems, it still isn't nearly as reliable or accessible as it should be. At least that's how my friend David Sable sees it. David is a gynecologist, an investor, an academic, and a magazine columnist who thinks deeply about the state of assisted reproductive technologies. And from his studies of infertility services, he's convinced that society is on the cusp of bringing down the cost and raising the success rate of IVF, so that it can finally become an affordable solution for millions more people every year who want to start or grow their families. And he thinks one of the keys to that next big wave of advances in IVF will be artificial intelligence. As you'll hear in our interview, David thinks most IVF labs today operate almost like artisanal kitchens, with way too much riding on the judgment of individual doctors and technicians. He thinks machine learning algorithms could supplement human expertise at many points in the process and turn what's essentially a craft into a truly automated and predictable industry. David and I first spoke about the world of fertility medicine back in early 2020, and I wanted to have him back on the show because just in the last couple of years, a bunch of new ideas have emerged for how to get more data on every phase of the reproductive process and how to train algorithms to make better predictions and give better advice. David's central argument is that IVF won't be truly democratized until providers have quote-unquote engineered the hell out of IVF to increase success rates and lower the chances that patients will have to pay for more than one cycle of the treatment. At the same time, he says the concept of value-based care needs to make its way into the IVF world so that patients and their insurer or their employers only pay when the procedure works, not when it fails. This is the first in a series of shows I want to bring you about how technology is changing the state-of-the-art in fertility medicine. 4 weeks from now, I'll bring you a conversation with Mylene Yao. She's the founder and CEO of a company called Unify, and she's trying to put a lot of David's ideas into action by using data to provide IVF patients with more effective counseling. But first, here's my full conversation with David Sable. David, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me, Harry. Great to see you again.
Absolutely. I mean, for those people who are listening, David is the guy that you just love spending time with. Like when I'm around David, it's just impossible not to be happy because he exudes such a positive aura that I love spending as much time with him as I can. And unfortunately, because we're not nearby each other, I can't spend as much time as I'd like with him, but it's great having him back on the show. So the last time we spoke in early 2020 on the show, in the spirit of those sort of previously on summaries that you get at the beginning of a TV episode, can you remind us what you were doing back in 2020? What are you doing now and what's changed?
Well, I guess the biggest thing that changed is now I get to go outside. Yeah, we were just a couple of years into our project we're trying to re-engineer the way in vitro fertilization is delivered in the world. We think that our data, we've studied this for going on 10 years now, that the true addressable market, the number of people that need the procedure, is about 40 times the number that are getting it now. And in order to deliver that, we need to really scale up and follow the kind of tech innovation playbook. Standardization, automation, uh, process optimization, defining best practices, which really kind of plays right into, it's like the Harry Glorikian. I had that weight, but really, what Harry, what you've been studying and talking about for long time now. Since then, we found just a lot of validation for our thesis, and particularly the area of trying to, morph kind of human intelligence and organic learning with what we're learning to do in AI and machine learning. Try to take all the stuff that we've developed in a analog, passing the baton from one practitioner to the next, the way the scientists in an embryology lab work traditionally, to let's process optimize it. We've got 40 years of great science and some relatively mediocre engineering. We need to bring the engineering up to stuff if we're really going to scale this procedure for all the groups that need it that aren't getting it. Very interestingly, about a month ago, we had the first meeting of the AI in fertility. Well, it was just called an AI in fertility conference, which is now going to become a regular thing. It was at Dubrovnik in Croatia. And it was really, it sounds kind of a little esoteric, a little wonky. What a fascinating, exciting meeting that was. It was just dominated by scientists and engineers and data people. So I was just like the humble little doctor sitting in the corner, trying not to be noticed. But just a terrific exchange of ideas, very mind expanding. Learned a lot, and kind of reinforced a lot of what we believed, and made some connections that I think are going to accelerate the whole thing, which is great.
Yeah, I mean, I really do want to double click today into that role of machine learning and other forms of AI and how they can play, a role in improving treatments in, fertility, infertility, which, as you said, really means improving the success rate, right? And so, if you were to sort of start at a high level, what are we learning about which parts of the IVF process can best be optimized through AI? I mean, for just to harken back, I mean, the last time we talked about the idea of training computer vision algorithms to analyze embryos at the blastocyte stage and help decide which ones are most viable for reimplantation. I mean, I'm assuming we've moved way beyond that in the past couple of years based on what you've seen.
Yeah, it moves are beyond in a lot of ways. That was a lot of ways that was the low-hanging fruit of applying artificial intelligence to IVF. And I've now met, I believe, 22 companies using some degree of machine learning for the optimization of IVF. And just about all of them started with, let's choose the best embryo. And the problem there is it's a great application. It's good as a demonstration project. But frankly, the value proposition just isn't there. If I've got 10 embryos and using traditional selection criteria, the embryologist puts the best one in the second month instead of the first month, it really doesn't move the needle when we're trying to go from 500,000 babies a year to 25 million babies a year. But in aggregate, you look at all the micro processes, all the decision points, all the things that have tremendous operator dependence and no set decision-making criteria, that there's a lot of, I know it when I see it, this is my way of doing it, kind of artisanal, it's like we've got all these, artisanal kitchens that call themselves IVF labs. And we need to engineer them. The best IVF labs in the United States right now, which have the best numbers in the world, you have a single genetically normal blastocyst. The chance of having a baby is about 65, 66%. which, having started out in the days when I started doing IVF, where we would take 3, 4, 5 embryos at a time and put them back in and generate a 10% pregnancy rate overall and a very high twin and triplet rate because of it. To think that using one, that we have a 2/3 probability of having a good outcome it's spectacular. Problem is, it's not good enough. Really, at this point, that should be the floor of every lab. And the range worldwide, we're doing 2.5 to 3 million cycles a year and getting 500,000 babies. So most labs are nowhere close to that 65%. So what's keeping us from getting there? And the difficulty with IVF is that it's a series of steps, each of which needs to be optimized.
Right.
And if we're judging them by the pregnancy rate weeks later, isolating the effect of any one part of that process, by the time you measure whether it worked or not, each thing we did is just drowning in confounders. So we really need a really smart mechanism to sort out what we're doing right and sort out what we're doing wrong. Now, for IVF, machine learning comes in at a perfect time, because we've gone from pregnancy rates in the low single digits to, in the best labs, pregnancy rates 60-odd percentiles with a single embryo. And that's using human machine learning. It's 40 years of aggregate work by scientists, doctors, embryologists, perfecting their craft in a craft way. And I don't want to diminish the importance of this. When I was giving one of my talks in Dubrovnik, I said, listen, let's not think that we've been doing lousy work for 40 years and now the computers are going to save us. Look at the steady improvement we've had. It's been remarkable. However, we're probably getting to the end of what we can do with human eyes, looking using light microscopy with a relatively narrow band of magnification. There's a lot of connections that we need to make that we just don't have the ability to assess. And that's, as you pointed out, using optical systems to look at static images. It's using optical systems to look at dynamic processes. And we now train cameras on embryos as they develop, which we can glean information from. We're trying to figure out not only which embryos are going to turn into pregnancies, but we're trying to extrapolate the genetics of the embryo so that we can tell which ones are genetically normal without biopsy.
Right.
Moving upstream in the process, we're using we're using machine learning to assess the sperm. If you put a petri dish full of sperm in front of an embryologist, how many sperm can they track with their eyes at a time? A couple dozen max. And then these are extremely trained, very talented people.
Right.
And then and we now have systems that track hundreds of sperm at a time, rank them on the basis of the criteria that we give. And you can see sperm will have a little green circle around it. And others have a blue circle, then a red circle, and others have little X's in them. And it will follow the best sperm until another one that comes along that's better. And the green circle will jump to a different one, and the blue will jump to the one that used to be green. Really spectacular type of analysis that humans can't possibly do. So, in terms of feeding data into a computer and having the computer tell us on the basis of hormone levels, age, various bodily parameters, what the best medication stimulation will be. Having the computer assist us in changing the dose of the medication each day, which is a decision that traditionally I would have a stack of 40 or 50 or 60 cycles that are undergoing, and I'd flip from one to the next and go over the blood test, the ultrasound work, and make these decisions, knowing full well that I'm making the same decision over and over and over again. And then if we're going to properly scale this to where I'm overseeing 5,000 cycles a year instead of 200, I want a computer to make these decisions and just spit the outliers out to me. Let me look at the 1% particular attention.
Yeah, and these systems can take in more parameters. I mean, I was talking to um, Dr. Mylene Yao, the CEO of Unify,
Unify.
and
Yeah.
using their system to look at the mother and age and other factors that may shed more light on how will this pregnancy take in that woman, and the whole financing behind it, which was an interesting conversation that we're going to get out there pretty soon in the next 2 to 4 weeks. But so your talk though was on was a SWOT analysis of AI and fertility, right? And for those who don't know SWOT, it's the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, which is a great
Right.
title. um, I mean, I feel like you've been talking about the strengths. Um, I don't know if you want to go into maybe a little bit of the weaknesses, and then the opportunities, and then maybe the threats.
Yeah.
But it would be great to sort of, after that, get your big take-home lesson from the conference in Croatia.
Definitely. Well, the strengths are, as we'd said, each process that we're doing by the seat of our pants, that we're either not collecting, either we can't collect enough data to make the decision correctly, or we just don't have the physical capacity to go beyond our level of understanding. That's the broad strengths. Weaknesses right now, one is that we don't have enough data.
Yeah.
If we're trying to bring the same type of analysis that we use for meteorology, or even looking at the way crowds move from a satellite, where you have massive amounts of data points to compare with a relative homogeneity of the data that goes in. So you can make these big macro predictions. Weather is a perfect example. IVF, we're just not doing enough cycles. And each patient's a little bit different. So the computers have to be very smart, and they have to be smart enough not to draw premature conclusions. And we have to be smart enough to recognize that the predictability of these processes is going to vary, and not to jump too quickly to change our processes, or think that if something contradicts 40 years of experience, that it's not that we've gotten it wrong. It's just that we need to feed more data into the system and let the system learn from itself. Now, I'm not a data person, as you can tell, but just trying to my own knowledge of math, statistics, and the way computers work. Second weakness of IVF and AI is that so much of the IVF cycle is not observable. We take an embryo, we put it back into the body, and we wait a week and a half or 2 weeks to do a pregnancy test. There's no data to analyze. Maybe we will find a way, and I'm actually working on an idea for putting a probe into cervical mucus, which is one of the few entry points where we can infer data about what's going on inside the body non-invasively. Mm-hmm. It's kind of the reproductive medicine version of an electrode. The kind of electrodes we use for EEGs and that type of thing.
Yep.
Certainly, one of the big black boxes that we've been trying to solve, that we're hoping that AI and machine learning helps us with, is we've been trying to get sperm to talk to us for hundreds of years. And for the longest time, we thought, what's sperm? Sperm is a Ziploc bag full of DNA with a tail swimming around. And so what do? We assess the way the sperm swims, and we assess the way the sperm is shaped. Morphology and motility, the two cornerstones of looking at sperm. Problem is, sperm's job is not just to swim around. It's carrying DNA. The DNA has to be normal. And there's also very important regulatory functions that the sperm performs just after fertilization. The egg doesn't do all the work. The sperm actually has a say in the embryology development in the very, very early part. Problem is, all we know how to look at is the way the sperm swims, which one of my colleagues used to say, it's like try to figure out what's in the trunk of the car by reading the license plate. You just can't do it. So we're trying to employ AI techniques to learn more things about sperm. The problem is, so far, all it's doing is doing a better job of evaluating morphology and motility.
Right.
So we've find a new way of assessing sperm, new way to look that is holding us back. So we've got these great tools, but we need to get the tool to be able to handshake with what the sperm can say. And we just don't know how to instruct them to shake hands, which is real frustration so far. The last problem that I see with what we're doing so far is we are gleaning outcomes data, i.e., we're trying to compare what the machines observe with who gets pregnant. But the only things that we can test that make it to the pregnancy test are people that have undergone the processes as we do them now. For example, when we try to train an algorithm to choose an embryo based on whether the embryo will get turned into a pregnancy or not, the only outcomes that the machines can use so far are ones that have already been screened by the traditional technique.
Right.
So there's an inherent bias. And one of the data people said to me, he said, yeah, these data are poisoned from the start. And what they were trying to explain to me that I'm not smart enough to understand is that the machine learning over time with enough data unpoisons itself. It actually removes that bias that it started with and gets better, which I just kind of blew me away. And maybe 10 years from now, I'll be able to understand what they were telling me. But it's one of the problems we have with women's health in general is there's just not that many things that we know how to observe. And possibly the biggest contribution is going to be training these, whether it's an optical system, whether it's a probe that's evaluating the metabolism of the embryos and the eggs by looking at the circulating factors within the media. But we have these means of assessing kind of a mechanism agnostic observations.
Mm-hmm.
See, we're as doctors and scientists, we're biased over trying to fit something into a mechanism. So we watch an embryo divide. We want the cells to be equal in size. We want them to reach certain static landmarks. At times, they all seem to reach at a given time, and that seems normal to us. So 2 days after fertilization, the embryo should have 4 cells. Those cells should be just touching each other, but not sticking together. 3 days later, it should be 8 cells, no other noise within the embryo. They should start filling in the gaps between themselves, and the cells should start merging. There should be cell-to-cell adhesion. This is normal because this is what happens in the embryos that we know turn into pregnancies, again, using human machine learning. What about the things that we're not smart enough to observe?
Right.
Maybe there's a pattern of variation of the thickness of the zona pellucida that it just never occurred to us to measure. Maybe there's something else that our eyes can't pick up, but if we use a different filtering system, will light up like a neon sign to a computer optical system when it compares looking at these embryos with 100,000 outcomes. So it's, in a way, it's, we're waiting for this new means of assessing data to tell us what we've been missing, which is what's really exciting. But it points out our weaknesses. We're not that good at telling the computers what to look for. We're just going to train your superhuman eyes on it.
Yeah, I think that's happening in more fields than I can shake a stick at, where the system says, hey, I noticed this, or I found this, or I look here, or here's a pathway for something that you had not considered, or if you're going to make this drug, take this, process, and the human never would have thought about doing that. So I think we're going to see
we have to be open.
Lots
we have
of
to be
that.
open-minded. That. Yeah. Now, in terms of the opportunity, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, you always have to check and recheck. You cannot assume the machine is just right.
Right.
And once you take it out of your lab and put it someplace else, it may need some retraining. based on that population. But I expect that this is going to, we're going to find things where people are like, never would have thought of that.
Exactly.
So now when you were there though, because I'm curious, this was your first sort of AI IVF international conference. Did you get a sense of, you know, how do we, the US, and what we're doing here compare to what's happening on an international scale? Is the best work on IVF and other technologies, coming from the US? Is it coming from other countries? Are you seeing different pieces? Because, I think about all the rules and regulations in different countries are all different.
Yeah, thankfully, most of it is in areas that aren't tightly regulated because they're not touching the patient. And yeah, so we're seeing, this particular conference, I saw great work from everywhere. It's, you just kind of sit there and, just in awe of some of these presentations, whether they come from Europe, Asia, the US. We had, one embryologist know very well from Mexico, just did, fabulous work on alternate optical systems. And it's, the general level of excitement was really palpable, because, part of it was these were data people and embryologists more so than doctors. So that it's, doctors always, we love the, wisdom bit, the clinical judgment bit, the part that relies on our experience. And, we're a little bit more stubborn about letting data push us off our preconceived notions. And the concept of a unbiased observer with mechanisms to be defined later make a lot of doctors uncomfortable. And okay, doctor, they do what works, and through repetition, it becomes ingrained. What was exciting about this conference was just how open everyone, the doctors included, were to be, passing the baton of data assessment away from just our own brains, which is a real big step in clinical medicine. And I think part of it is in IVF, we're all frustrated that for all the progress we've made, we're still not as certain as we want to be. You go in to get your appendix out, you wake up, your appendix is out. That's pretty well certain. In an IVF cycle, you can do everything right in someone who's, when they walk in the door, you think they have an extremely good chance of having a good outcome. And it doesn't always happen. And
Right.
that's very frustrating for us. And obviously, a quantum higher frustrating for the patients that are going through it. So, I think the work is being done everywhere. The nice part about this is that a lot of the work it's not that costly. A lot of it just comes from people that are really smart. And the computational power is not a barrier. People can get processing power, memory, storage. That all costs nothing nowadays. And if you've got a system in place to allow collection of data, then you feed it in and you say, what's it going to tell us? And the nice thing is that you've got different populations of patients in different areas. So for example, the Israeli population of IVF patients may be very different from the population of IVF patients in Spain, right, for lots of different reasons. And since everyone's doing it in all these different geographies, we have an opportunity to merge these data sets to get away from the inherent collection bias that a lot of healthcare research is prone to. And I don't know, I'm kind of drifting away. Am I answering your question?
No. It's spot on. I mean, I always think to myself, half of our battle is getting enough data in one place, so that you can start to train these systems. But back in 2020, you said, "Look, I have my list of ideas." You've got your chart. There were 23 things on it back then, if I remember correctly. I'm curious, especially after this conference, how long is the list now, and what have you maybe gotten rid of that failed, or what is new and most promising?
Well, the list has morphed into a map because as we we found as we were looking for solutions to the particular problems that we want to solve, we found that the solutions are often very overlapping. For example, one of our big challenges is to move as much of the IVF process out of super overbuilt, very expensive laboratories as we can. So the way we do that is by closing the engineering system from retrieving the egg to freezing it. We make it so that that egg never sees the ambient air. So we don't, all the things that we do in $1,000 a square foot laboratory for air quality and things like that. We want to take that part out of it, and we can do it if the egg never leaves the box. How do we get the egg never to leave the box? We let the egg retrieval be done in places other than the laboratory. If we're going to do that, we need to train other professionals to do the stimulation with the fertility drugs and retrieve the eggs. So we need to have non-reproductive endocrinologists do these procedures. Now, there's nothing inherently difficult about them, but it's just that they're not trained to. So where does AI come in? Well, here we need to develop the decision support so that a obstetrician gynecologist without subspecialty training here can feed the data in to the system, have the system tell them what the medication regimen should be. And as the data points, the blood test, the ultrasound, or actually we're replacing the blood test with urine tests to move them into the patient's home. As that gets fed into the system, the AI algorithms tell the OBGYN what the medication changes should be so that everything can be done in all these different places. There's 45,000 OBGYNs in the United States versus 1,200 reproductive endocrinologists. So if we can move this to places that are closer to where the patients live, to doctor groups that may want to offer this part of an IVF cycle, they may want to offer it at a different price point. They can certainly run that laboratory cheaper. They can put it into a procedure room, which costs $75 a square foot instead of $1,500 a square foot. And so here we are setting out to solve a real estate problem. And guess what our tool is? Artificial intelligence. It's a multiplexed kind of three-dimensional model that we've put together. And all these different places we find relying on computer vision, algorithms, AI, machine learning to help us out is going to be overall process optimizing. We want to get to a point you mentioned before, financing it. In my model, we're going to get to a point where nobody pays for an IVF cycle if they don't have a baby. It's one of the enormous unfairness of having done this for 20 years. A patient would say, "Doc, this cycle has to work because it's my last one. We just mortgaged the house. No way we can afford another cycle." It's like you just feel like you're just not worthy of this type of thing. So as the data gets better and better, and like the work that Dr. Yao's doing, Unified, the predictive analytics become more and more helpful, then it just becomes an actuarial equation. Right. Then we underwrite it, we spread the risk. When we make the data that good, we can invite the insurance companies to do what they always do. And they'll say, okay, this is the kind of data we need. Insurance companies, they insure car accidents. It doesn't have to be a disease that people die of. And if the insurance companies don't want to, hell, you and I can open an insurance company. It's a heck of a lot easier than a lot of stuff that we do. So it's just going to lend itself. So we want to solve the problem of better, more equitable cost and access. What's the tool we're going to use? Artificial intelligence. It just kept popping up all over that map in ways that, it's great. It's a great convergence of the technology. And let's face it, AI is in its early stage of its development as well.
Oh, yeah.
So as these become increasingly sophisticated, it's really going to accelerate that, higher results, better access, better experience for people, and ultimately being able to take care of, 10, 20 million people a year. And, independent of where they live, what their geographics are, whether they can afford it, that type of thing. So it's a great convergence that way.
Well, you've talked about this idea of opening up a Bell Labs of infertility, where the goal would be to, standardize, optimize everything about IVF, eliminate the uncertainties, make sure that the success rate for the patient is as high as possible, and that, it, you know, it's funny, right? Every time I talk to somebody in IVF, they always say, we want to have an implanted embryo that leads to the birth of a, healthy baby.
Right.
So are we getting any closer to your vision of a Bell Labs of infertility? I know it's not under one roof, but, you know, are we getting closer to it? You know, are we on our way, or you think we're still at the early stages?
No, we really are, which has been, and the great thing is it's happened organically. You've got the companies that are focused on AI for IVF have almost entirely, all of them have moved from point solutions to much more comprehensive tackling of each of these arbitrarily performed, highly operator dependent things. So that, they're now, instead of saying, okay, we want to sell choosing the best embryo for $2,000 a cycle, they moved away from that. It was never a viable business plan to begin with, but they moved away from that to, okay, we've identified 24 things in an IVF lab that we can, gather the data on, process optimize, and just keep, engineering the IVF process. And they're selling this service, or they're pitching this service, or they're trialing this service in some very well-run IVF labs. Secondly, we're seeing some startups that are actually opening up their own practices. This is like, it's like the AI tail wagging the dog. It's like, we're going to build it from the start. We're going to, completely engineer things with the goal towards starting with, very comprehensive data collection and trying to, with each node of the IVF decision tree, figuring out what we should be doing on a data basis, rather than starting from the traditional practice and trying to be convinced to deviate from it. And which, to me, if these things can happen organically, that's so much the better, because then you don't need, you don't need to convince someone who's already busy, who's already making a good living, to try to do something different. And it's important too, because we're trying to offer a different type of service. It's like I probably said in the last time that, IVF is the Four Seasons and the Ritz-Carlton right now, and nothing else. So we need, entrepreneurs, founders, progressive-minded doctors, scientists, and data engineers to create the Airbnbs and the Hiltons and the Sheratons. And as long as you get 8 hours of good sleep and a clean bathroom, that's what we're solving for. It doesn't have to be the $15,000 suite in the Four Seasons here in New York. So if we give people the same 65% probability of having a baby with a genetically normal embryo at different price points, or maybe where the retrieval is done one place, the storage is done somewhere else, and the transfer is done somewhere else, allows the patient to move away from this kind of travel agent model where they go to an IVF center, they make all the decisions for them and give them one big bill, to a model where they can comparison shop. They can say, okay, I can do my egg retrieval with my OBGYN here for X dollars, most of which was covered by insurance. I could send the embryos to a central cryo storage place. And then when the time comes to thaw the eggs, fertilize them, develop them, and transfer one, we can go to an embryology lab which likely in the future is going to have a lot of this engineering built in, and it's going to be mechanized as well. We're looking at into ways to invent sort of the Da Vinci surgical robot for embryology, whereas all these things that are done manually now by people that some of them more talented than others, all of whom are subject to fatigue, and the quality of their work tends to decline as the hours go by.
Right.
If we're looking to scale up IVF and do 10 times as many cycles, we need someone to help them out. And if we can do it by machines that don't get tired and marry the AI with robotics, so much the better.
So I almost want to say, like, who gets the world of fertility? And I guess what I'm saying is I see lots of people now from, say, the tech world or understanding AI saying, I can come in and, come up with a process to develop a drug, right? I always like it when they're married with somebody who actually understands the biology, but they feel pretty
Right.
comfortable that, the data is there for them to sort of move this along. Is that happening in fertility, or is it still, this only the people that really have been working in it and understanding are taking a crack at it? Are you seeing, people that really understand the software coming in and saying, I can help solve this problem?
We're seeing a movement in the right direction on all sides. And a couple data points. One is I started investing in healthcare in the early 2000s. And there was a real segregation between tech people and healthcare people. And the healthcare people just didn't speak tech and they didn't speak data. And the tech people, almost to a person, tended to underestimate the complexity of biology. Biology I am always overwhelmed by how complex it is. And that's a function of the limits of my own imagination and intelligence and just how complex biology is. And a lot of people from the tech side would come in thinking, well, it's just one more data set. So let's apply the same rules to biology and we have a likely outcome at the pace that we've come to expect on the pure data tech side. And over the decades, there's been a gradual realization that biology really is that complicated. And we're seeing that in a microcosm on the people on the tech side that are trying to get into IVF. So they've gotten that really quickly. On the medical side, the only semi-positive thing I could say about the existence of COVID, and this is something that happened shortly after you and I talked last time, is that in the middle of the year 2020, IVF in the United States and a lot of other countries just shut down. They turned it off. They didn't do any cycles at all. The equipment needed for anesthesia and things of that sort was triaged elsewhere. Nobody wanted to come in and be in the IVF centers for fear of passing the virus along. So it's kind of shut down and reopened that summer. Middle of 2020 or towards the late summer, they reopened IVF. And of course, what did we all do that ran IVF programs? We brought everybody back in at once. We had this big backlog. We said, okay, let's do these cycles, get the patients through, because we don't want to keep the waiting list really long. And of course, when you want to have a baby, you want to have a baby. You don't want to wait. And they very quickly found that they were operating very close to capacity beforehand. And if you try to increase this new, let's just turn up let's just make the assembly line go faster. Well, guess what? The assembly line couldn't go any faster.
Right.
And they very quickly ran into the limiting factors, the number of doctors to do procedures, the number of embryologists to do procedures. And almost collectively as a field, everyone's eyes opened up and say, this whole engineering thing makes a hell of a lot of sense. So the difference in embracing the concept of using the kind of the textbook for innovation that we use in engineering really offers a hell of a lot more than we thought than the traditional artisanal kitchen model of running an IVF program. So the movement in the right directions come from both sides for two very different reasons. But I think to answer your questions, yes, they really are getting it and working together with a kind of if not a uniform vision, but at least a converging vision for where this can all go.
Well, there's nothing like a good old-fashioned pandemic to cause change, right? So
Not
last
that I
time
repeat that process.
Well, Mother Nature has a way of keeping us on our toes. So
Keep it
Um,
humble, yeah.
you know, we've got a Democratic administration in power now, right? And I'm wondering if the politics around funding for all of this work, has gotten any easier. I think the last time we talked, you said, if there's a sperm in a dish, you can get a grant. But if there's a sperm and an egg in the dish, forget it. The NIH won't go near it. Has that gotten better? Is it worse? Because this isn't going to get funded all by itself. Our every science needs, federal funding or grant funding or things like that to move forward faster.
Yeah, we need the basic science funded. There's funding for the engineering aspects of it, because it's more modelable, more predictable, as a person that does venture capital. If I can model it, I can put a rational price on it. If I can put a rational price on it, then we can find funding. It's the stuff that's not modelable, the stuff where we just have to do things and let the experiments meander along in a process of discovery. In the US, in fertility and reproduction, it's still, there's almost nothing there. In other countries, you're seeing a lot more openness to grant funding and things of that sort. But the problem is the pools of capital that they put into it are so much smaller than the US pool. But the big, I guess the outlying effect, the outlying factor here is the population replacement issue. And this is something I did a lot of work on in 2020. I looked at the total fertility rates of, which is the number of children that each woman of reproductive age produces.
Mm-hmm.
And the magic number is 2.1. So every woman during her career as a potential, mother, just to put it in as dry terms as possible, in order to keep the population constant, needs to produce on an average of 2.1 children, the 0.1 because of early childhood mortality. The US right now is about 1.7. Taiwan and South Korea are about 0.9. There's a lot of parts of the world, including China. China's well below 2.1. So we've got a lot of countries that are looking at becoming, where Japan is right now. Japan's population is actually shrinking.
Right.
So that there's going to be a policy emphasis in all. It will come to the US. It's come to many other countries already. For decades, Israel does IVF almost for free until you've had 2 children. China has gone from a 1-child policy to a 2-child policy and is on their way towards encouraging multiple children to address this. Northern Europe, assisted reproduction fertility is free on the consumer, well, essentially free on the consumer side, it's covered. And you're gonna see that here in the US as well, because there's going to be a policy incentive to try to compensate for the fact that in almost every developed population, we try to get pregnant later. We still want children, but the probability of having a child over 30 is so much less per month. And in aggregate, that results in just many less people being born. People in their mid-30s, there's about 4.5 million 32-year-olds and 4.5 million 33-year-olds in the United States. Last year, we made 3.8 and 3.7 million babies. So, the people that are in their prime reproductive years right now, and the average age of first child now is 31 in the United States. So we got 4.5 million people in total making 3.7 million babies. That's per year. And, so we're going to see a leveling off of population growth. As it stands, people are still passing away later and later in life. So we haven't seen the population shrinking, but we're certainly seeing an aging of the population.
Right.
And that has far-reaching effects on the economy, on the labor force to take care of the older people, on the productivity per person year. So you start breaking these down, there's going to be a lot of reasons for the NIH to start funding experiments where you have a sperm and the egg in the dish together. And I think that's going to happen. Now, there are other political currents that are going in the other direction, certainly. And
Right.
with the Dobbs decision and Roe v. Wade being, repealed, there, without getting into the politics of it, there is a lot that's up in the air about the way IVF will be delivered in the future. And it is a very intensive debate about that. How much does this affect IVF? And from state to state will be the efforts to change the way IVF is practiced. Some of the laws that are being passed to restrict abortion get interpreted in ways that say, okay, well, it's restricting IVF also. So there's a lot of noise around that aspect of it. But in general, I think the overall trends, if we want to maintain our populations, maintain our economies, overcome the inherent difficulties of getting pregnant as we choose to do it later in life, are going to point towards basic science work being funded. I just hope it's sooner rather than later.
Yeah, you and me both.
Very long-winded answer to your question.
Yeah, no, but I mean, there's always this, oh, let me throw the pebble in the pool, and nobody thinks about all the ripples that it's going to cause as it's going out, because they haven't gone through the science to understand the implications of what they're doing. And some of those implications, you're like, nope, that's not exactly what I wanted, but hey, you got it because of what you did. So it's an interesting situation. So moving on to a more exciting topic. I always read your tweets, or I try to keep up with them. And, you're working on a book. I mean, you had a funny tweet which I was very, lucky to be part of, in the form of a memo addressed to all your peers saying, to all my friends and colleagues, would you please stop publishing books until I finish writing mine? So what's the book going to be about?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure that out myself. But, it's like I enjoy writing, and you start going, and I'm sure you know this better than I do because you've been tremendously more productive than I have. But you start writing about one thing, and then your brain tells you one thing, and your fingers the words that come out of your keyboard take you in a very different direction. So right now, I'm working on I'm just kind of driven into this cul-de-sac where I'm developing an idea about, and this is going to sound totally ridiculous, about how we're going to use cervical mucus. Now, cervical mucus is one of the most unbelievably well-engineered fluids in the universe. It's just, it's a extremely interesting, and the whole world is rolling their eyes now. Say, what could be interesting about cervical mucus? But it's the only externally available, non-invasively obtainable fluid that changes what it does at different points of it, at different points of, in this case, of the month. And that change correlates with something that goes on inside the body that we have no other way of studying. And let me digress for a second, and feel free to edit this entire thing out if it makes no sense. But yeah, in medicine, one of the first things we learn is the difference between clean and dirty. The body, what does the body want to do? It wants to protect its circulatory system, its nervous system, its skeletal system. So no bacteria, no viruses, no nothing gets in there. And in exchange, it's, the skin, our skin is just covered with bacteria. And there are other areas of the body that, upper digestive tract, lower, the very tail of the digestive tract, nasal tract, part of the respiratory tract. We allow bacteria and things in that. And then we put these mechanisms of defense in there. And every one of these mechanisms is the same every single day of your life. Every minute of the day, if something gets low in your respiratory tract, you cough and you sneeze, and you've got special immune cells that go after it. The stomach is filled with hydrochloric acid. So if a bacteria dares get through the esophagus, it's, it meets the death pool. So And evolution has put these things together extremely effectively. One of the things that evolution has given us is cervical mucus, because the upper reproductive tract is sterile. The inside of the uterus is sterile, the fallopian tubes, the ovaries leading into the abdomen. That's a pristine environment. So we've got this cervical mucus, which is like the bouncer at the bar. It's like this incredible thick mucus, doesn't let anybody in. No, you're not getting through that door, because that's a pristine area. Except one part of the month, the bouncer stands back, opens the door a crack, and says, okay, you can come in. No, the rest of you can't. And now, okay, all of you're allowed in. And with this very nuanced, sophisticated way, they allow the sperm in for fertilization to occur. It's the only part of the body's defense mechanism, or the only border between clean and dirty, that has a regular interval where it changes to allow something physiologic to happen. It's a brilliantly designed thing that nature has given us as a gift. Now, where it gets interesting is we talked earlier about women's health, and how women's health, there aren't that many things to measure, and all these things that go on inside the body. And I'm not just talking about getting pregnant, things like, pain from endometriosis and menstrual pain, and what triggers early labor and things of that sort. We have no way of studying them. Well, the cervical mucus changes regularly. At the same time, a lot of these pathologies occur.
Mm-hmm.
We have no way of studying, which tells me that the cervical mucus probably has a different gene expression pattern at these points than it does when the bouncer is just sitting there keeping the door closed. So if we had a mechanism, and cervical mucus is readily available. It's easier to get cervical mucus than it is to draw a tube of blood. The patient can do it herself. So there must be some means of studying cervical mucus that's going to unlock some of these diagnoses, some of these unknowns of women's health. It's going to be like a new vital sign, like this entire new area. It's like Nobel Prizes are going to like flow out of putting that AI probe into continuous assessment of the cervical mucus in ways that we've just never imagined.
I don't know why I think molecular cartography, right? Where, I don't know if you know, there's a company called Resolve Biosciences. I had them on the show, where you can actually see the gene expression patterns of which cells are doing what, depending on physically where they are. And I'm wondering if that could be a door opener to understanding this better. But, I'm riffing right now. So
it's so you asked me what I'm writing about. Like, I think I'm writing about and re-engineer the way we help people get pregnant. And then suddenly I'm knee deep in talking about, what size probe we would have to put in the cervical mucus. And, it's like these little esoteric detours. I have no discipline the way I write. So, at some point, I don't think anybody will ever read this stuff. But that's why people like you who are so productive, what are you on, like your 12th book now?
no, no, I think I'd be dead if I was that far. Somebody would, either I would have killed myself or somebody else would have killed me in my family. But no, I mean, but I have a strong feeling there's a book that's going to come out hopefully soon that will help people understand this area, the processes around it, areas where it can be improved. I don't want to say a how-to, but at least get more people in tune with it so that they can contribute to it if they so wish.
Yeah. Well, I hope that book comes out too. And I just have doubts as to whether I'm going to be the one writing. I'm more likely to review than I am to write the book. But no, I appreciate the implied vote of confidence that I may have some input into something like that. But it's a fascinating intellectual area, and I just need to get my published words per hour of life lived ratio up a little higher, and because I think that more seriously there's a hunger for this knowledge communicated in a way that can be absorbed in mass, because the people that we're trying to, getting back to the core of it, the people that we want to help and the suffering that we want to reduce, people that can't have children or people that have miscarriage after miscarriage after miscarriage, the suffering is as intense as anything in healthcare. And in order to get treatment to them and also give them knowledge of what's happening and hope that it's going to happen quickly, as well as keep them looking for these things, it's important. And it transcends our own personal contributions to it. This is 20 25 million people a year who go through, either they can't have a family or they have outcomes that are heartbreaking, or they are genetically predisposed to have children that can die in their earliest years. If we can make a dent in that, that's huge.
Well, David, if I can tell you that, after getting to know you, you've opened my eyes to so many things around here. So I cannot imagine that your contribution to this space has been huge. And I am looking forward to a book that sort of helps, outline this space and detail some things for most people. So I only wish you incredible luck, and I look forward to reading it.
Oh, well, Harry, you've been a friend for a long time. Love talking to you about these things, whether it's over a cup of coffee in Cambridge or over Wi-Fi. And looking forward to charting the progress as we go along.
Excellent. It was great having you on the show.
Thanks for having me again.